Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekulona, and this is Nashville. SNAP benefits, or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, allows low-income individuals to purchase food for themselves and their families. Simply put, it is a vital resource. Here in Tennessee, there's been a serious backlog. And I mean serious. At one point, as many as 50,000 applications were waiting to be processed. But as of March 13th, DHS Commissioner Clarence Clark said the backlog, defined as pending applications over 30 days, is at 2,670. We all need to eat to live, and the backlog, along with rising food prices, is making that tough for thousands of Tennesseans. So what's going on with the SNAP backlog? How did we get here? And what can we do to make sure it doesn't happen again? My next guests are here to help us understand more. Signe Anderson is the Senior Director of Nutrition Advocacy at the Tennessee Justice Center. Signe, thank you for being with us. Welcome to This is Nashville.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Appreciate you being here. Okay, so let's start with the basics. Just what is SNAP?
Yes. So SNAP is a Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps, which is meant to provide food benefits to families and individuals who are low income and are struggling to make ends meet.
Who exactly is eligible for the program?
So anyone who's below the poverty line, and folks who live in Tennessee and across the country are eligible if they meet the income eligibility provisions.
Now, have those parameters changed over time?
They get updated every year based on the cost of living, but it's always been anyone who's at 130% of the poverty line. So for a family of four, that's not a lot of money.
Okay. Now, tell me this. How did this backlog even start? Do you know?
Yes. Part of it originates because of the changing of a computer system. So in order to operate a program like this, you need a computer system. And ours was known as the Accent system, which it was a very old system and it needed to be updated. And so it was very good that DHS moved to update the system. I think it's been about 30 years since it's been updated. And so we're talking green screens. Mm-hmm. And in order for the program to function better, the new computer system was needed. But in that transition, there were some things that did not work so well.
And now, you said over 30 years. It's been since 1992 since it's been updated. That was my freshman year of college, to take you all back that. What took so long?
So they've done fixes to the system, right? They've done updates and things like that, but they haven't completely overhauled it. Some of it, I think, is cost. I think states have delayed. Some states have delayed longer than others because of the cost to upload or to overhaul a system. I'd say that's one of the major reasons. Mm-hmm. Most states have gotten to the point where they have completely updated their systems. There's only a handful of states left, and Tennessee's one of them that's finally made the move to completely overhaul the system.
Now, DHS Commissioner Clarence Carter, correction from the earlier mistake I made. He said it's being decreased from 50,000 mm-hmm. to just over 2,600. What type of sign does that give to you?
We're very optimistic to see that the numbers have decreased as far as people waiting that long. I mean, still, 2,000 is still a very large number of people to be waiting a long time. So we're excited for them to get past that point so that nobody is waiting over the 30-day period. And I will also highlight, too, that we serve a lot of people that need expedited SNAP. And those are the families who have the most severest situations where they're homeless or have less than $100 to their names. And even those individuals were being impacted during this time and waiting, like many others, 30, 60, 90 days in order to be connected to benefits.
About how many folks were you helping who were in that situation?
We're a small organization, so we were over the span of the past 3-4 months. We've probably helped about 300 households, and that's much higher than what we normally do. But we're also connected to partners across the state who also help hundreds, thousands of families. And so we've been navigating the system with them to try and better connect people and make sure that they're not getting lost and not falling through the cracks, and that DHS has their information so they are getting connected to benefits.
Okay, now I'd like to bring in my next guest. Jules is a graduate student studying social work. Jules applied for SNAP benefits. Jules, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Now, you are not on SNAP now, but you've applied, right?
I went through the application process and ultimately got so frustrated and realized that I wouldn't even be approved. So I decided not to submit the application.
Okay, so talk to me about that. What was the process like for you, and why did you get frustrated?
So I actually work at an emergency shelter for my social work grad school placement. And so first I was trying to initially just help the individuals in the shelter apply for SNAP benefits. But it was when the website was down over winter break, the links, you would click on the application link and it would just redirect you into a wormhole of the state of Tennessee website. And it was making me so frustrated that I thought, okay, I need to do this for myself anyways. I'll go home and try to figure it out myself. And I just wanted to throw my computer against a wall. It was so infuriating. And the application asked such specific questions about the amount of money in your bank account, what stocks do you have, just the kind of information that's hard to just pull up at a moment's notice.
What was the most difficult part of the process?
I would say even just accessing the application. That took me multiple days of repeatedly checking the website and Googling it and just trying to see what indirect way I could even get to the application.
Now, you said that you were helping the people that you work with and you realized, hey, I need to apply for this myself. But you also mentioned that you didn't meet the income requirements. Why didn't you meet the income requirements? I mean, I imagine that someone would understand that, hey, I need these benefits. I don't have the money to purchase food right now for myself. What was the difficulty?
So what I have found interesting about the way government benefits are set up, and I've had the same issue with healthcare and accessing that, is that I have zero income right now as a graduate student. But I've also been very privileged in my life to have generational wealth and to have financial resources made available to me by my parents, which have put me somewhere solidly in the middle class. However, the SNAP application looks at, do you have stocks? Do you have investments? How much do you have in your savings account? So I might, at the moment, have a certain amount of money in my savings account, but that's what I'm using to live off of for the rest of the year. And so with $0 to my monthly income coming in, I was told by the government that I made too little money to qualify for healthcare assistance, and I have too much family wealth to qualify for SNAP.
You made too little money for healthcare, too much money for SNAP. Signe, how often are you running into people who've been in similar situations as to what Jules has been in?
Yeah, Jules' situation is not uncommon, and it's really frustrating, right? There are folks that fall into the gap and definitely have the need, but the way it's set up right now, it misses people that shouldn't be missed and should have support. And I would mention there are policies that the state could apply to that they could draw down from the federal government that Tennessee has not yet done. And one of those is something that looks at the benefit cliff. So yes, there are folks that fall through the gap, but there are more things that Tennessee could do to adopt policies that they have not yet adopted.
You said something. You said the benefit cliff. What is that? So
the benefit cliff is when you make just a little bit too much over the income level to qualify. We often see working families get hit by the benefit cliff. So say you're a mom, a working mom with 2 kids, and you get a 50-cent raise. That's enough to pull you, you might get an extra $100 a month in your paycheck, but you end up losing $200 in food benefits. And so it doesn't it doesn't add up, right? It doesn't make economic sense to take that raise if you're going to lose so much more in food benefits to feed your family. And most states have adopted a policy to address the benefit cliff. Tennessee has not yet done that, and it's something that we're advocating for the state to do.
Now, Jules, have you been able to gain access to food?
Yes. So I am incredibly fortunate to have a family that is willing to jump in and support me financially. But so many of the people who I work with or just in our society don't have that kind of socioeconomic privilege and ability to fall back on. But I'm also really lucky that my graduate school, the University of Tennessee College of Social Work, has a Nashville campus and they have a food pantry. And so they regularly bring in baked goods, bread, etc. And everyone knows that I am going to be leaving with $20 worth of groceries every week that I go in for class. And that's been a big help.
All right. Now, I'd like to introduce my next guest. Greg Bullard is the pastor at Covenant of the Cross. Pastor Bullard, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I hope you're having a good day.
I am having a good day, my friend. I hope you are as well. Now, let me ask you this. Are any of your parishioners having trouble gaining access to SNAP benefits?
Yes, we do have people who have trouble gaining access to SNAP benefits. And we also do a lot of work around hunger for the working poor who are off the benefits cliff, if you would.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've fed up to 10,000 people a year for a full month each time.
Wow.
Because there's just that lack of continuation.
What have the people you served, what have they told you about their situations?
Almost universally, they are all working full time, and they are all people who are doing everything they can to just be able to pay the rent and have food and have transportation. They're not even looking at healthcare issues at that point. They are literally looking at those three things. Because in Nashville, you have to have a car to get to and from work. And so they are all talking about the fact that they have to choose which one are they going to have to do today. Are they going to eat, or are they going to pay the rent? Are they going to put gas in the car?
Or are they?
And so a lot of it is that kind of decision making.
Now, you run a food pantry at Covenant of the Cross. Can you tell me more about the folks that you serve and the work that you all do there?
We are the predominant food pantry for the LGBT and queer communities, because in most places you actually have to ask for permission. You have to tell people what your social situation is, and a lot of places won't serve any one of those communities. So we choose, and we've chosen and have had quite a bit of the community come to us in either emergency situations or ongoing. We have people who've been getting food boxes every month for 3 years because they can't get enough money coming in to get more than what they're earning, and they don't drop down into the benefits level. So everything we do is around that community and helping ourselves to survive and to thrive.
Now, okay, so Signe, tell me this. Pastor Bullard just explained how they at Covenant of the Cross specialize and emphasize work with the LGBTQ community. But tell me, what is the typical profile of a Tennessean using SNAP?
Yeah, it's your neighbor. It's seniors. Over 40% of children are SNAP participants. 35% of individuals in Tennessee who participate in SNAP are seniors or individuals with disabilities. It's really anyone who's struggling to make ends meet. It's like not one particular look or person. People you just don't realize who live down the street from you might be needing food stamps. And poverty and hunger is very hidden in the United States. Like people don't share that they're struggling like that, which is unfortunate because I think we've done a disservice to folks in poverty and that we vilify people in poverty, and it shouldn't be that way.
I do want to talk about the stigma on this later on in the hour. Now, Jules, do you know anyone else who's had difficulty applying for benefits?
Yes, I in particular think about one of the young people who I've been so lucky to get to work with, who was able to, get into a housing program, but then they dare to get a full-time job and want to work for them and improve their lives, but then they get told they make too much money to qualify for SNAP. And I see this pervasive problem, or even someone who works at a corporate job but doesn't have that generational wealth I was talking about. There are so many bills you have to pay. It's not just food, like Pastor Greg was saying. You have to choose these days between what you want to get. And I don't understand how the government wants individuals to get out of homelessness. How do they expect them to stay out of poverty and to stay in housing programs if they can't afford all of the resources that they need?
You really raise a good point referring to the benefits cliff. You said that they dared to get a full-time job. And what's interesting to me is that a lot of times on the political trail, politicians will bring this up. And, Ronald Reagan infamously talked about welfare queens in the 80s when he was running for office. Pastor Bullard, what's your response when you hear stories of people getting full-time jobs, yet they still don't qualify to get the help that they need, even though they're doing everything that, quote unquote, the government or society requires of them?
Well, I would actually argue that the Tennessee state government does not want to help them at all, is what I would argue. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that the reality is they are vilifying and making those individuals who do not fit their criteria of what successful looks like. They want to eliminate any and all supports of them so that they can control their lives even more. And I believe that the way you have to handle that is just like Covenant does, my church. We decided we knew that our community would not be served by anybody else. So we chose to sacrifice a lot of other things that we might have wanted to have done as a church and focus on what we call the 3 H's, the 3 things that matter the most for a person: hunger, healthcare, and housing. And those 3 things, if they can be met, while you may be poor, you will not be completely impoverished. You will have hope for another day. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe that the solution when the government is against you is to rely on the government to change necessarily, but to begin the change within your own community.
Now, Signe, the Pastor Bullard raises an interesting point. He says he feels that the government, state government, does not want to help people. But, hunger and food insecurity affects Democrats and Republicans alike. I want to know, is SNAP access to the benefits, is that the same for people across the state in different regions? Is what's going on here in Davidson County very similar to other places in the state?
Yeah, it's similar. It's a bipartisan issue, right? When you talk to somebody on the surface, I think we all agree that no one should go hungry. But then when you dig into, who is deserving and how do we address it, that's where the problems perk up. And yes, I think legislature is misinformed. I think they don't understand the whole picture of what it's like to be in poverty. And so part of what we're trying to do is educate and share information and make sure that when they do put legislature forth, that we make sure that we share information so they have the full picture and maybe reconsider some of the things that they're thinking about putting forth. Right now, there's a work requirement bill. Right now, with SNAP, if you aren't working 20 hours a week, you can be kicked off the program. And we would argue there are a lot of people who are underemployed, and taking away food benefits does not help someone to find work or to keep work. And so there's a lot of states are coming along in the thinking of how to approach this. We're not quite there yet. But I hope that we continue to educate legislature so that they know that taking away food benefits does not help people find work and fix that issue.
How many people in Tennessee are on SNAP right now?
The numbers are difficult because of this transition, but normally it's around 800,000 people across the state.
Okay.
It's higher during economic downturns, and it ebbs and flows and is a really good support system when, like during the pandemic and during the Great Recession. But generally in Tennessee, it hovers right around that 800,000.
Now, Jules, you mentioned something. You said people with, jobs who are, up, say, middle-class jobs are having trouble getting benefits and having trouble affording food. I look at inflation. I look at the rising cost of food, and I look at potentially maybe Nashville and the surrounding areas don't pay people a living wage. It's something that we've talked about quite a bit on this show. Do you know young professionals who are struggling right now?
I don't know about personally, but I have definitely heard friends of friends say, I feel like I have a very successful job with people of all ages working at my company. Yet we had someone who we realized was accessing, they would have like a community box from Second Harvest, and they realized that this individual was struggling with food insecurity, and that even though they felt like, we are paying our employees quite well, they had to really look at boosting their company salaries, because how can an employee need Second Harvest food boxes if they're supposedly getting paid enough to live? And, even Mayor Cooper in the last few years of his mayorship made some really great boosts to the minimum wages for Metro employees, because they looked at the cost of living. But on that income alone, unless you have a significant other or that generational wealth, is that actually enough to live in Nashville? And I would say the answer is no. You see everyone getting pushed out. And even if you've lived here for decades, you might not even be able to raise your kids here one day.
I want to thank all three of you for this discussion. Please promise us you're going to stick around and come back with us later in the hour, okay? Awesome.
Okay.
All right. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll meet people whose SNAP benefits were impacted by the backlog. You can tweet us at This Is Nashville with your thoughts and comments. We'll be right back.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Kulona, and this is Nashville. Our state has been dealing with a backlog of unprocessed SNAP applications. At one point, the backlog was as large as 50,000 applications. It's a lot of people who are going without food for themselves and their families. People who need assistance depend on those benefits, as well as a system that lets them know where they stand. Now, my next guest is a person who got caught up in the backlog, and she's here now to share her story. I'd like to welcome Rae Ruohonen to This Is Nashville. Rae, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Really a pleasure. So, how have you been adjusting to the delay in your SNAP benefits?
So I applied in December, right before Christmas. I was informed that my job went from 40 hours to 8 hours.
Hold on. 40 hours to 8 hours.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I work in hospitality in downtown Nashville, and we have what we call the dead season. So things kind of die out with tourists, and that's what brings in a lot of our money. So I got cut, unfortunately, and I had just experienced a death in my family. My grandfather passed away in Michigan, and I had to make 2 trips up there that month as well. And money was really, really, really tight. I didn't know how I was going to be able to afford to eat, let alone have Christmas dinner. And so I applied, and I thought I would hear something back in a couple of days, because it did ask you, if you have emergency fund, like if you're less than $100 or whatever, you can you get that emergency fund, and nobody called. So I went to a food pantry and picked up a box, and I got some stuff, and that's a great resource. But unfortunately, even that is hard. Sometimes you get turned away when you show up. They don't have enough to give out.
Now, are you living alone? Do you have any dependents?
I don't have any dependents. I have no children. My parents have passed on, so I don't really have anybody to ask for emergency help. I mean, my family would help me if I was my family in Michigan would help me if I was dire need. But even it's hard for them, so it's hard to ask for help. In general. So I feel like I asked for help and I couldn't get that, and it was really defeating. I didn't get a phone call until January. I never got a phone call. I got an interview for January 20th, and I thought, oh, okay, yeah, I'm gonna finally get some help. I can get caught up on my things I fell behind on, and then I never got the call. So I called them, and I was on hold for 5.5 hours. Now, I had my Bluetooth device on, waiting. Was someone finally answered? They looked into my case, and they said, oh, you haven't even been assigned a worker yet. And I was like, oh, well, who am I supposed to talk to then? I'm trying to get caught up. I need help. And I still didn't get the answers I needed. And it took until February 20th, they finally called me. And so 2 months later, they finally called me, and I got approved, but it's just unreal that I had to wait 2 months.
Talk to me about your emotional state as you're waiting these 2 months. You desperately need help. Yeah. You get informed that, hey, January 20th, we're going to call you for an interview. There's no call.
Yeah.
You call them. You're waiting for 5.5 hours. I can just imagine how maddening just listening to that music would be.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. I mean, we all know you have to constantly be calling somebody, and that's just one more call that I had to deal with and hope for the best, and then didn't even get anywhere I needed to get. And it's hard. I don't know how still to this day how I'm going to catch up. And I just asked for help for food so I could eat, going to the grocery store just for a handful of things is $40 now. You can't get out cheap.
Do you know anyone else who's in a similar situation?
I do. A few people, actually. I help a girl that is very young, and she has a baby, and she needs help and doesn't have family to help her. So I go to this church out in Hermitage, and I pick up a box. But like I said, I've been turned away getting there half an hour after they open, and they're like, we're full. We don't have any more left. And that's really heartbreaking to have to text her and be like, hey, I wish I could buy you some groceries because they turned me away, but I can't even do that. And I don't know where else to go.
What does that tell you about the states or the federal government's willingness to support people, Americans, who are in need?
I don't think that they're doing a great job at all. Unfortunately, I mean, I feel like they don't have a touch with reality. I mean, you go into the grocery store, it's $200-300. Some people don't have that. Some people, I've skipped meals because I just don't have food. I don't have the ability to pick up and just go to the grocery store and drop $40 to buy some chicken and some milk and some cereal,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I see a lot of people struggling, and that hurts too.
Does this make you want to leave the state?
I have considered. I did leave for a little while, and I came back. But unfortunately, it is just as hard in other states as it is here. But the access to care, I'm from Michigan. I feel like they do a lot better of a job there. When you apply for food stamps there, it's quick. You get it in 15 days. You have a card in the mail. I did experience it in Michigan as well. In my past, my mom was on food stamps, and it was a completely different system, different world.
Mm-hmm. Now, Signe Anderson with the Tennessee Justice Center and Jules are still with us. Signe, how often are you hearing people with stories that are similar to what Rae shared?
Unfortunately, every day. We are in the Napier neighborhood, and we have folks coming in our front door who have been waiting since December. We've been helping folks who also have similar situations with the long wait times. And some folks have limited phone minutes and can't stay on the line that long. And so it's the system set up right now not for people to succeed and get through. And we really want the state to do better.
Now, Rae, did you attempt to go to any of the physical offices?
I did not. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to do that. I was frantically doing DoorDash, Uber Eats, just trying to make my ends meet. And spending time on 5 hours on the phone, I feel like is already taxing. It's hard to just go. And I also heard the offices, if you just show up, you have to sit and wait for a while. It's not just like, oh, hey, we're here to help. I mean, you got to sit around and wait for a long time.
So are people choosing 5.5 hours on the phone or 4.5 hours waiting in line?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the case, right? You wait on the phone, and if you can't get help, you go into the offices. And so a lot of people are going into the offices, and we're hearing the same thing. And we've had clients who have gone in and have waited 2 hours or longer to get seen by somebody in the office.
Jules, as you hear all this, considering that you're in graduate school to work to help people, what's going through your mind?
What goes through my mind is just that there is that gap we were talking about earlier in between you are doing everything that the government and society has told you that you are supposed to do to, quote unquote, pull yourself up from your bootstraps, get out of this hard place that you've been in, and they are not giving you any of the tools or resources theoretically that they created to exist to help you. They're not letting you actually access them. So we create this cycle of poverty that I agree with Pastor Greg. We don't actually want to let people out of that cycle, is what it feels like. Because if we did, then we would make it easier to help people continue to rise out of the troubling circumstances that they've fallen into. And I also just feel like working at an LGBTQ affirming emergency shelter, I see folks who are on the marginalized edges of society who have even more difficulty accessing these resources, because to even make a SNAP profile, you need an address. And where are you supposed to get your SNAP card sent to? And you just have to have enough privilege and access to figure out how to get through the SNAP benefits. Tell me how that makes sense.
I don't know how. Anyone else? Yeah. If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekolona. We're talking this hour about the state's SNAP benefits backlog and how it's impacting Tennesseans. My guests are Rae Ruohonen, Signe Anderson, and Jules. I am trying to understand how we got to this place. I understand how we got to the place with the backlog of this computer updating system. But Signe, talk to me a little bit more about the policies that the state has had over the years, and seeing that I would imagine that in the pandemic, a lot more people were using SNAP benefits. It was a need. It was a necessity. That need is still present now. Why haven't we adapted or kept some of the same policies that we used during SNAP to help ameliorate the problems that Rae, Jules, and others are going through and experiencing?
Yeah, it's a good question. We should have adopted a lot more policies than we have. Even during the pandemic, there were waivers and options that the state could have taken that they didn't. Even there was a period of time where all individuals could get the maximum benefit. Tennessee backed off from that. I believe it was December of 2021. And states had the option to keep giving families the full benefit up until the very end of the pandemic, the end of the PHE, the pandemic health emergency, stated by the government. So I don't understand why the state does not opt in to do these things, because many of them would help the state administratively. There are policies to help seniors connect to SNAP, and we have not adopted that policy. There are policies that would make it possible to apply over the phone, and we haven't adopted those policies. I mentioned earlier there's a policy to address the benefit cliff called broad-based categorical eligibility that we haven't adopted, and that would help address some of the working poor who are trying to make ends meet and trying to stay out of that cliff. So there are multiple options that we should be taking that we have not yet adopted. And I think it's a good question for our state government.
You know, Rae, right now, downtown, state legislature is in action. They're in business. People who are listening are supporters of them, constituents. What do you have to say to our state lawmakers about this situation and the potential consideration of some of these policies that Signe just shared with us?
We're not asking for money or for even handouts of any sort. We just want to eat. We just want to be able to go home and cook a meal, go to the grocery store and put some things in our cart that make us happy. Food brings us joy, and there are so many people who don't even get that. There are children who go to school and the only meal that they get is the meal at school. And why is this a thing? I just don't understand why there's a stigma that people take their food stamp cards and sell it, or, people on drugs don't feed their kids. And that's not true. People who get their food stamps use their food stamps for food for their kids. And we're not supplying that to the people. I just don't get it. It's infuriating.
You mentioned the stigma. What do you have to say to listeners about the stigma that's out there for people who receive SNAP benefits and others? I mean,
it's already hard to pull out your food stamp card at the grocery store and have someone behind you see it, or you only have a certain balance, so you have to tell them, oh, can you only put this amount on there? And it's already hard to do that. And it's just the entanglement of asking for help and getting the help and going to the store. I don't know. It's so much. It's so much. It's so hard.
I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks to Rae Ruohonen. Signe, Anderson, and Jules, you guys will stick with us through the break, okay? All right, when we come back, we're going to look at some of the other issues with food affordability in the state and examine how they are being addressed. As always, join the conversation by tweeting us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back. I'm Khalil Colonna, and this is Nashville. We've been discussing SNAP benefits and food security. There are neighborhoods here in Nashville that are known as food deserts, places where there's no grocery store and the availability of healthy foods is pretty scarce. But what are some of the other issues with food affordability, and how are they being addressed? Well, my next guest is here to help us to learn more. Afton Bain is a state representative from District 51. She's the sponsor of the grocery tax bill that's under consideration at the House, and she joins me now. Representative Bain, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really a pleasure. So, you've introduced a bill to eliminate grocery taxes. Tell me more about this bill.
So the genesis of this bill, I have a neighbor who lives across the street who's on a fixed income, and she receives about $750 a month to live. And I let her borrow my car to go to the grocery store. And after I won election in the fall, we engaged in a conversation around the rising prices of groceries. And she said, well, do you think you can do something about this? And I said, yeah, I think I can. So Senator Charlene Oliver and I teamed up to propose a piece of legislation that would eliminate Tennessee's grocery sales tax in perpetuity by closing corporate tax loopholes.
Why is this important to you?
I think for a lot of folks across Tennessee who are working 2 to 3 jobs, and with rising inflation, that grocery prices just have not gone down. And it's, climbing food prices, it's strained finances for families, especially low income households. And unfortunately, it is one of the most regressive sales tax in the country, which is why we have sought to eliminate it.
Now, last year, there was a trial period where there was no taxes for a few months. How did that trial period work out?
I've heard from Tennesseans all across the state. They absolutely loved it. And in fact, we had a weekend of action to eliminate the grocery tax a few weeks ago. And I was outside a grocery store in Memphis. And so many people came up to me and said, I remember, how much that meant to me out of those 3 months out of last year. And I really wish that the sales tax would be eliminated. So I think this is an issue that is resonating across party lines, across class lines, across racial lines. And we're really excited to see it materialize in the legislature.
Look, we're in America. You talk about eliminating taxes. You're going to capture a lot of people's attention and a lot of folks' support. But how do you respond to critics who say it's unfair to store owners?
That's a great question. So oftentimes from, I would say, the more, a few of my Republican colleagues, they'd say, well, that cost will just be passed on to the consumer, which to my response is, businesses have one of two options. They can either cut their profit margins and their CEOs making hundreds of millions of dollars, or they can pass that price on to the consumer and let the consumer decide. So if they tout a free market, as they believe Tennessee is, then the consumer can decide not to buy groceries at that grocery store.
What about folks who say that it's taking money from schools? Like, for example, in Knox County, the grocery taxes are put towards school funding.
Also a great question. So the way that our bill eliminates the tax is by closing corporate tax loopholes, which would generate around $438 million a year, as well as instituting a different type of tax that would be accountability mechanism for corporations that aren't paying anything. I want your listeners to know that we received a report from the Department of Revenue saying that 60% of corporations don't pay taxes right now. That is money that could be going to schools. That is money that could be going to our firefighters. And so our bill proposes a way to backhaul that revenue that would be lost for municipalities and the state.
What about, I'm curious about how this interacts with SNAP. Well, let me ask you this. How does the bill impact mom and pop stores, small grocers?
So I actually had John Dyke, who's the owner of the Turnip Truck, at my press conference when we launched this piece of legislation in the fall, and he could not be more supportive of eliminating the grocery tax. He said it would be beneficial for his working class folks that work there, as well as a lot of people across the state. I think what we would see is we see a lot of Tennesseans that are crossing the border to Kentucky to buy groceries, for example. And that's revenue we're losing. And so that's revenue that could be gained, especially by these mom and pop stores in rural communities.
People are actually driving to Kentucky to buy groceries?
Yes, many, many, many.
Interesting. Now, we were talking about the SNAP backlog. How does this interact with the SNAP backlog that we currently have running here in the state?
So this bill doesn't address the SNAP backlog, but I will say that there have been numerous proposals to address SNAP in terms of increasing the benefits to address rising inflation. And so myself, as well as Representative Tory Harris, put forth multiple proposals that would address the limitations and the amounts that families were getting from TANF and SNAP to account for rising inflation.
What about non-government solutions? What non-government solutions to food scarcity and food affordability are currently out there?
Well, I think we can look to a lot of the community groups, especially those that have been working in neighborhoods where there are food deserts. I know there's a lot of nonprofits in Nashville that have been really thinking at a high level as to how we can revamp a lot of our food processes and ensure that the working class folks have access in a way that folks in West Nashville do.
This backlog is really troubling to a lot of folks. What can be done to prevent it from happening again?
Yeah, unfortunately, at this moment in time, it's an administrative issue in terms of their system that they overhauled. And I will say that they're working on it. And for me as a legislator, I think a lot of us are, should these systems be overhauled in the future, that there are that the container is a bit more robust and there are limitations and parameters so that people are not losing these benefits as these transitions happen.
I'm thinking, like, how can we expect folks to move forward with or without their benefits as we, go into the future? Food costs are only going to rise.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, if I had my way, I think SNAP can be overhauled in a way where people have more access and have more benefits. I think what I'm excited about as a legislator is to reimagine what a world would look like where people aren't having to email me to access SNAP benefits, and that we do have a surplus of food and grocery stores and people and healthy options. And I guess a lot of my legislative work is trying to build that vision, but piece by piece.
On that note, what would the ideal SNAP program look like for recipients?
So I think it's one where there's less red tape. A large part of my career as an organizer with a group called the Tennessee Justice Center was removing the red tape when it comes to bureaucracy and government programs. I would like to see a world where people have housing, have access to food, but they're not having to call 3 or 4 people to get those benefits.
I want to thank you so much for taking time to be with us. Oh, one more question. Where does the bill stand now, and what are the chances that it gets passed and codified into law?
That's a wonderful question. So the bill was heard in a subcommittee today and was placed behind the budget, which means that the negotiations will continue. And so Senator Charlene and Oliver and I are now moving to budget advocacy, where we are lobbying to include eliminating the grocery tax in the governor and legislative budget.
All right. I want to thank you so much for taking time to speak with us. Representative Afton Bain is from House District 51. Representative Bain, again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekalona. We're talking this hour about SNAP benefits and food accessibility. Now, you just heard my conversation with House Representative Afton Bain. And Representative Bain notes she shared that you can email your state legislator and ask for help in expediting your application. So if you're a listener, if you are in need of getting an expedited application, or you know someone who is, make sure that they contact their state representative for that assistance. Now, I'd like to bring back my guests, Signe Anderson, Pastor Greg Bullock, and Jules, who is a graduate student. Thank you all for being back with us. I want to talk about some of the non-government solutions that exist. We got a clip that we don't have time to play, but it's from Matt Glassmeyer. He's a Nashville parent. He talked about taking leftover food from a school breakfast program, repackaging and repurposing that to go to food pantries and to help folks who are out there. Signe, what other non-government programs are out there that exist right now?
Yeah, we work very closely with food banks across the state. There's that option. There are lots of pantries and individuals that are set up to provide food. Those are usually the options that we lift up. Just, real quick, touching on the government programs, there's WIC for women who are pregnant and for children up to age 5. School meals is also a very important program. I know those are government related, but still very important programs.
All right. Jules, what does the ideal program look like to you?
I think the ideal program looks like something community-based, low barrier, something that doesn't really look at income or wealth or any types of those requirements, just supporting each other. And I think some of the community gardens that different folks have been doing around here in Nashville are some of the most creative, healthy, helpful solutions I've seen to this problem.
Pastor Bullard, our society places a stigma on folks who are in the need of help, especially when it comes to people needing food. You work with people who feel the brunt of that stigma. What is that doing to the folks that you work with?
It destroys a lot of their spirit and a lot of who they feel they are. And so they struggle with this idea of, am I even really human at sometimes? That's why, like, when people come to our food pantry, the only question they're asked is, are you hungry? Or do you think you're going to be hungry? You get whatever you need. We don't run around asking all these kinds of questions, because all of those extra additional questions are actually usually barriers to prevent people from getting what they need.
I've got about 30 seconds left. What do you want listeners to walk away with, Pastor Bullard?
I want them to walk away with the idea that there are other options where they can get what they need if they will just look beyond what is easily what the government offers, because there are many places like Covenant that will offer whatever they need as long as we've got it, and we always have enough.
I really want to thank all of you for being on the show. I want to thank my guests, Pastor Greg Bullard with the Covenant of the Cross, Signe Anderson, who is with the Tennessee Justice Center, and Jules, current graduate student. Thank you all again for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced and directed by Elizabeth Burton. Our board operator is the fearless Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. Special thanks to Mr. Ken Jobe. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Wherever you get good podcasts. How about that? And the conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram and tell us what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekulona. We'll see you on Monday, everybody, and be good to each other.